Oh shit, I gotta get my water. Hold on. All right. Hello, my friends. What's happening? All right. Vocals round two. Lots of good questions this week. Let me bring Jon on here. What's up, buddy?
Hello.
How are you?
Feeling all right today.
Feeling all right?
I had a nice tennis match this morning.
Yeah? Did you win as always?
I did. Shut him out first set, and then second set he won a couple of games on me.
Are you slipping?
No. I did. I messed up a few times, but the first set was very minimal mistakes, which was really exciting because I usually make a lot of mistakes.
Nice, man. Nice. Well, so we're gonna do some do vocals round two, and I just want to say I'm getting a lot of. Let's see. I want to do a sort of a brief little monologue at the beginning. A lot of great questions this week. Lots of follow-ups on things we talked about. Some things we didn't get to last week. Also, people asking questions that we answered last week. So all of you asking those questions, watch the first one because we answer a lot of the questions. And then there's lots of people asking, hey, where did you talk about this one thing in this one video or this one stream? You know, this is why we have the clips channel, which we're trying to put up all these little bits. So the Live with Matt Rad clips channel, which is, Live with Matt Rad on Instagram. And then we have a clips channel on YouTube as well. But part of the idea why we're doing this is there's so many great people doing how-tos and tricks and ideas for how to do this with your delays and reverbs and this EQ trick. And, we're trying to do something a little different where we talk a little more philosophically. So for those of you that are sort of tuning into this stuff for the first time, we will definitely do lots of specific questions, but I don't really want to get into being like, here's the EQ thing that's going to solve your mix, because that's one, it doesn't exist, and
yeah.
Two, it's not exactly what we're trying to do here. But that being said, there were some good questions this week, which we can start getting into, and some follow-ups from last week. One of the big ones last week, which we didn't get to, was people asking about parallel compression, and I answered some people in the DMs and just talking about what that means and how you or I might use it.
We could talk about that today too. That's good.
Yeah, so maybe we can start there. I mean, Can
we start here instead? Hold on. Can we just start here?
Sorry. Oh, look at that. That's so beautiful.
Merry Christmas.
I saw you post that. The other day, and I think I hit you. It looked very nice, lit up at night.
First Christmas tree in LA. First Christmas in LA in a decade. So.
My girl wants to get a Christmas tree. I don't think we can fit one here, so we may just get a wreath so we can get the smell.
I got a wreath downstairs. It smells amazing.
The wreath is going to be the vibe.
No, get a wreath. Yeah. Just a little bit of that nice Christmas smell is really helpful up here.
Yeah, just pretend like we have winter, because I'm like in a tank top. I sat in the sun earlier. I can't do anything else. Might as well sit in the sun.
No, I know. I was sweating outside playing tennis today. It's not cold. It's not LA. It's not winter.
So it's like, no matter what you say about winter in LA, people will either be like, fuck you guys, it's cold where I am, or they'll say, fuck you guys, winter's great, you want winter. So it's like, all right, well, fuck us then, whatever. I like it here. I'm not mad at it.
Well, I'm down to talk about parallel compression in regards to vocal. I guess today's vocal.
We can talk about it generally too, but yeah, go.
I'd like to spit out a couple of thoughts on this mix that this EP I was doing all week. It came with a parallel vocal stem printed.
Meaning it had a main vocal stem and then a compressed stem, and they were like, we use these together.
Yeah, and I muted the parallel stem and I unmuted it. I was like, all right, what is this doing to the vocal? And it was doing nothing good. So I think people think that when they put a parallel vocal in, it's going to help them, right? Like it's a fail safe. And I used to think that way too, but most of the time, you're messing with phase again, like any other duplicate version of something. You're going to mess with phase. And with harmonic distortion, sometimes that's cool. With EQ, it's usually a little whack. And with compression, it could be a little bit of both, and it could do something beneficial with that phase push in a certain region. But for most of the time when people are doing it in the box, it thins out vocals. So I had a vocal up close and dry, and I'd put the parallel in, and it would just sink back in the mix a little bit. So I just want to start off by saying that this isn't a one-size-fits-all. Don't just parallel compress because you've heard that your homie does it, or that your homie's mentor does it, or someone else does it. Don't think you have to do it. Well, nine. Just to finish the 9 out of 10 times, I don't have a parallel vocal on my vocal. On any record that someone has been commenting in the thread, on the comments that they like the vocal sound for, all of those don't have parallel vocals.
Well, I want to say to people too, it sounds like an annoying answer, but it's really actually great advice. I'm about to say what I'm saying is great advice. Do anything that you hear about people doing, parallel compression, saturation, transients, any of the stuff we talk about, any of the stuff any of the stuff that we talk about that we maybe don't like, or stuff that we do like, or anything that anybody talks about, try it out, do a really extreme version of it, and hear what it's doing. And that's how you'll know, because there's so many situations where it's like, I love technique X, but not for everything. And not all the time. And sometimes it's a technique that only gets used 1 out of 20 times, but that 1 out of 20 times saves the vocal.
Exactly.
Those sorts of things. Anything we talk about on here, with stuff we talked about last week, stuff we talked about on the other streams, anything we try, do an extreme version of it so you know what it's doing. So parallel compression is a great example of that. Like take your vocal track and double it and smash it with a compressor and mix them together and see what happens. And sometimes it's going to sound fucked up, and then that's a good sign not to do it. The other thing with parallel compression is the other version of parallel compression or parallel anything is a mix knob on plugins. So that's something I definitely use a lot. I haven't done a proper like parallel vocal compression track. I've copied out a vocal track to do effects or do particular distortion things and then trying to blend in. Sometimes it doesn't work, like you said, with phase, but I'll definitely use mix knobs on things.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Essentially the same thing, yeah.
I'm the opposite. I don't ever blend. Well, let's go the opposite. 1 out of 10 times I'll blend, but especially on a vocal, since we're specifically talking vocals here, the lead dry vocal always exists, and something will be either on a send if there's going to be a parallel processing, or on a duplicate track. I dupe everything. So I just duplicate the track and I fuck around with it, so it looks like the same waveform and I can mess around with it. So that's a similar thing, but I like the dry having full control over the dry vocal, the dry source in general. And it's different when you're producing versus mixing. But when someone sends me a stem to mix, I want to have access to the original really quickly. So if someone's like, "Hey, I don't really like what you did to whatever," I go, "Okay, cool, I can get back to it." Not like, "Ooh, what did I do here? Did they have the mix knob at 20% and I moved it to 30?"
Well, this is an important thing to remember again as we're talking about this. Jon is a mixer in all the ways that we're talking about, is not exclusively a mixer, but essentially. And so you're talking about receiving a track that has processing on it. You are receiving the rough mix, so the processed vocal, and you're talking about that being your dry vocal. So he's not talking about a vocal without any effect. I mean, sometimes you do that, but you're not talking about something without any effects or any EQ or anything like that. You're getting the rough mixed vocal. It's a really important thing for people to understand, because there's a lot of questions about like, well, what happens? Why would you do this? And it's like, well, he's getting the rough mix and moving from there.
Well, what are some questions that are being asked in regards to that?
Well, we can get to that second. Let's finish. I've got this all organized in my brain. Let's finish the parallel compression. If there's any other thoughts you have on it, or
I also think that translating that thought of keeping a signal dry is helpful in all aspects of the process. So you can always go back to how it used to be, so you can check yourself. So thinking about last week, we talked about detuning delays or auto-tuning harder on delay throws or verbs. If you have a dry one, it's so easy to send that track to one of those effects. It's really flexible, having a dry signal with no parallel processing mix wet knob on the sound. Like what the worst thing to me is when someone says, "Oh, I can't." It's usually a Logic thing. "Oh, I can't send the vocal dry because the verb is on the track," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, so send the vocal to the verb and then print this return." "Oh, no, man, I just kind of throw it on. I don't really know what I'm doing," like whatever the language is. Okay.
And you go, "That's why you're hiring me."
Yeah, exactly. But I understand the point of the process. Yep. If they have a compressor after the verb, then the verb is going to be affected differently, yep. and the compressor is going to be affected differently. So you can't just send it; it won't sound or feel the same. So
the verb will sound very different. Yeah.
Yeah. So it has to be sent that way. This hasn't happened that often, but it does happen sometimes. And I think it's as an engineering technique, even when producing, verbs and effects on a vocal should be separate. I think that's different when you're talking about sound designing a synthesizer or a keyboard or a guitar. Like, put the reverb on it like it's a pedal and dial it in. Like, I'm not a purist when it comes to that. I'm specific, and not even on background vocals either. On background vocals, like, put the H3000 on the track. You know, crazy. Put that slap delay, like, get that texture right. But I definitely think on a lead vocal, you should give yourself and anybody to follow you a bit more flexibility later.
Yeah, that's so there's two thoughts I have on that. One, this is, again, talking about the relationship between producers, writers, and the mixer. You're talking about a situation where you want to make sure that you, as the mixer, or if you're the producer, you're giving the flexibility to the mixer so that you have the most options to play with the vocal. If you start doing lots of inserts of reverbs and delays and things like that, it may make more work for you to recreate that or adjust it accordingly. Because if you have, you're basically committing to certain sounds that you might, as the mixer, want to manipulate a little bit.
Yeah. So, and it's how I would do it if I was recording or co-producing something that I knew I wasn't mixing. Like, I'd leave room for the mixer to do what they're going to do. I'm not going to be a dick and be like, well, it's going to be my rough mix that they use. It's just like, that's not doing any good to anybody. It's weird. It's just a weird way to think about your ego and your credit, and like, it's just weird.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because I'm not dealing with this explicitly right now, but sort of dealing with a version of this where I'm finishing a production on the way to a mix. It's a project you and I've talked about. I won't name it out like this, but and a big part of what my job is taking the productions which are like 94% done and taking them to 100, but I'm not the mixer. So I'm also sort of, in addition to I'm basically getting the rough mix into a place where I do some production tweaks. I've added a few things here and there and switched out some drum things, but then prepping it for the mixer. Yeah. And so it's a lot of what we talk about, especially, when we talk about mixing vocals. I think a lot of people on here are, producing in their bedroom. Some of them are much more accomplished as well, but like, doing things from scratch. And so people have to remember that we're talking about, on the professional level, a longer process potentially from the songwriter. There's production, there may be another producer, then there's the mixer, then there's the mastering engineer. And along that way, there is mixing happening. There are adjustments happening. And so a lot of what we're talking about is the nuances of that. So I don't want people to be confused when we're talking about like, the thing like, I never compress. Well, there's types of compression, and this is sort of a nuanced conversation. Yeah.
I started compressing again on vocal recently.
Somebody asked go-to compressor, and I was like, I'm not going to ask John that. But since you said that, what's your go-to?
Ozone 9 Dynamics.
Do you like the Faraday?
The Faraday limiter.
Yeah, but that also limits with ratios, doesn't it? So it's not it's not necessarily a true peak limiter.
I'm at infinity, so I use it as a limiter.
So sorry, you like the Ozone one, and
Ozone 9 Dynamics is the only compressor I'm using at the moment when I need to compress something. It's transparent. It doesn't have a sound, and it's not the vintage dynamics either. It's the straight up dynamics. And I don't want a sound from my compressor. we talk about that. I want sound from harmonic saturations and other more modern techniques that we've discussed in previous episodes. So I'm using something really transparent if I really need to compress. And if I need to compress, it's almost like I only do it because I know someone is going to want that kind of pinched sound. I am not doing it when I'm in my clip gain, really transparent limiting mode. But if someone says like, hey, I'm just feeling like this needs to be like, have this kind of sound, like I'll do it with a very transparent compressor. And I think that's the best sounding one that I know of.
There's a couple ways I want to go off of that because there's a good clip gain question which I want to get to, but maybe first I want to translate a little bit of this for some people, because again, I'm getting a lot of questions that are a little bit more less nuanced, I should say, than some of the stuff we talk about. You know, when someone talks about using like a CL1B, classic Pultec, now Tube Tech, tube compressor. A lot of people use it for vocals. It's a fine compressor. I've used it on stuff before. The reason that, you tell me what you think about this. I think the reason I think you don't like using things like that is because you have better ways to achieve the things that people think they are achieving with something like that, which is compression and saturation. So a lot of the vintage gear that people like, including tube mics, you know, I use tube mics, I use some tube stuff. The reason people like a lot of that stuff is because you're getting harmonic saturation in addition to whatever else the thing is doing. So a microphone is picking up presumably a great spectrum of frequencies, and it's adding harmonic saturation, and that's a really nice thing. If you're going through a compressor, and it's a tube compressor, it's adding some harmonic saturation, and that's a nice thing. But the reason that I think we, especially you, try to avoid using things like that, you don't have anything like that in your studio, is because you can separate out the compression and the saturation with a much more controlled and focused technique. And so you're wanting to achieve the things that people like about having a tube compressor like a CL1B, but you can do it in a much more controlled way. You don't need a box that's just going to do it one way. And so I think that's a thing for people to really understand when we're talking about this stuff. It's not like, you know, we talked about it last week too. Hey, shout out.
That's sick.
We talked about it last week too. You mix plenty of stuff with upfront in your face pop vocals, but you're achieving it using a different set of techniques than most people do. But it's important to understand that, you know, when people talk about compression is a concept. It's a way to limit dynamic range. A compressor is a different thing. A compressor is a particular box that does a particular thing. But you compress with saturation, distortion, different types of harmonic saturation, with a limiter. There's all kinds of different ways to compress the dynamic range of a signal. So anyway, I wanted to sort of get that out there because I feel like we get a lot of questions about that.
Good translation, yeah.
Shout out.
Someone brought up the BG2. I definitely use the BG2. I rarely use it, but I use it actually on this.
What is the BG2?
Highland Dynamics. They make a tube compressor that myself and a lot of homies use. I like it. I used it on this CP I was just talking about. And it was one of the only plugins or hardware pieces on the Vocalist. It didn't need very much. So I definitely used it, and it just sounds good to me. The needle doesn't move very hard. It just brings the vocal up. It's more about the sound of the saturation in the tubes for me. So I like the BG2 on vocal. I don't use it on anything else. I don't really use any gear on anything else except for the VLC ones by the Hazelrig Fern guys and the Unfair Child. And it's just for the sound, because I like the sound.
Yeah, and people remember too, again, like we talked about a second ago, when if you're not moving the needle on the Unfair Child or the other stuff, it's still doing some amount of processing, which includes some compression because it is saturating.
Yes,
and saturation is, I don't know if saturation is by definition compression, but I guess it's not technically, but it almost always is.
Every once in a while, I think to myself, hey, I'm going to go in and I'm going to overcompress this thing just because people always do it. And then I put it on and I take it off. Like, this sounds better. Yeah. I'm going to try to get away with this. It just sounds more real and also forward. Like there's I don't know. There's other ways to do things. That's all. Yeah. We talk about this a lot. I don't want to spend too much time on it.
It's Jon. I don't compress Castelli.
I like your translation though. I don't use a compressor. Of course, I compress the waveform with other techniques. I just rely more on exciters and multi-band saturation processing more than I do compressors or multi-band compressors.
And, which is a great segue, clip gain. Somebody asked it was sort of like the basic fundamental question. James asked, explain clip gain a bit more. Are you doing it by looking at the waveform? Are you doing it by looking at the, or just by ear? Why does the waveform, so why does the waveform show a part as quieter but sounds a lot louder? If you get an uncompressed vocal, how far will you go with ironing out clip gain? I definitely want to say real quick that, what we said before where you're often getting compressed processed vocals. And so your clip gain approach is going to be a little bit different than if you just get a completely compressed. No, it's not.
It's not. Okay. It is and it isn't. I don't necessarily think that's a distinction that needs to be made. If a vocal needs to be leveled out more than it has been, whether it was just tracked or sent to a mixer, it's the same process.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are lazy and we talk about this and put the RVOX on. Well, if someone puts an RVOX on, I have to clip gain to match by ear the leveling that the RVOX was doing. So it doesn't matter what part of the process. We're trying to get an even dynamic vocal. So allowing dynamics to come through, but also
let's parse that real quick. Even and dynamic. People think, when we have a waveform that's here sometimes and it's here sometimes and it's here sometimes, evening out the level of certain sections or certain words or certain phrases still allows, because you're not using a compressor, still allows the softer parts within the word, within the breath to feel dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, if you're singing higher in the range, the visual representation of the waveform could be smaller looking because it's falsetto, but maybe it's still cutting because of the arrangement. Like, I mean, there's so many things that could affect the visual of the waveform versus how we hear it, right? That's why the answer to the first question is simple and not, meaning it's both by visual and by listening. And just like using an analyzer is in an EQ plugin, I think AI is great, and if it can tell me that my peak is at 430 and not 440, that I need to reduce, I'm glad that I have assistance. I usually can hear, and it's just validating where my ears told me that I need to reduce, but that's because I'm a trained mix engineer and I've been doing this since I was 15 or 16 years old, but it still is helpful to see that. So it's helpful to have a visual, but people would ride faders and do syllable rides on consoles with no computer. So this is the technique that's been done, and now we have a visual source for it, which is nice. So it's a handicap, and let's just use these as handicaps because a lot of the time a balanced vocal does visually represent itself as such. Well, if something is recorded well.
Yeah, you can do some things visually, but 100% of the time, I believe, I hate to say 100% of the time, but I believe 100% of the time, how it sounds is what matters. Yeah. So if you're messing with clip gain and you're like, but I turned this way up, I turned this to the same volume as this, but this sounds way too loud, well, then turn it down. There are definitely times, there's so much about perception rather than volume. If somebody sings something softly and you put it at the same literal volume as the thing they sing loudly, it's going to sound weird because it's not meant to, like when somebody's not projecting something. Now there's lots of examples where that's a cool effect, but it's an unnatural thing. And you may want your vocal to be unnatural and in your face in a soft, weird kind of intense way. But yeah, if the clip gain looks like it's the same, but one thing sounds too loud, just turn it down. You should be using your ears on all this stuff.
And speaking of using your ears, I'll go as far as in a clip meaning in a syllable, in a phrase, in a word, in a whatever, I'll also adjust the EQ independently. So in Pro Tools, it's option 6, and it's this kind of post-looking screen. post-processing screen, which has an EQ and dynamics that are built in per clip. I believe in Logic and Ableton that's existed for so long.
I don't know about this in Pro Tools.
Yeah, it's hidden. Option 6 on the numpad.
No shit. All right.
Exactly. Nobody knows this. It's such a secret. Why is it a secret? It's a lot of post people use it because it's basically Audio Suite. It's basically Audio Suite per clip.
And is it which EQ plugin is it? Is it their EQ3 or whatever?
EQ3. It's like built in. Yeah. So So if you're a proximity effect on a word, or there's a like a pop, a plosive, you can filter up that one thing. You're not audio suiting it like people used to have to do. You're just doing it per clip. Now, if you commit the track, then it will commit all of those moves as well. Right. But I'll go as far as doing that. I've talked about this on the talk mix. I automate up saturation on certain words to help balance the texture. Maybe Khalid stepped back from the mic a little bit, and I missed some of that grit that was in that mid range. So I'll automate up a saturation or a clipper plugin on a syllable. So either it's automation, but this case I'm doing Audio Suite. So a clip gain to me is more than just volume. It's EQ and it's saturation. Never a compression. I don't add a compressor to that part of it. I'll clip gain into my limiter, into my Fairchild, into whatever dynamics I have. With a ceiling of -6 or something. So I'm at least giving myself a little bit of a handicap that I don't want to go over.
This is an important thing. I just had the thought. I feel like these talks should be called non-shortcuts or long cuts or something like.
Yeah.
Like what we're talking about is, a lot of this stuff can be solved for a lot of mixers by just putting the time in. I mean, that's the reality of it. Like what we're talking about is just the reason why there isn't a compressor that's going to work for your vocal all the time is because if you spend the time to do all of these nuanced things, you don't need the bad artifacts from that compressor. You can even out your dynamics, but it takes more time. I mean, that's the reality. It's like, this is why you get paid what you get paid. And, this is why why professionals are professionals, is because sometimes it takes a whole lot of really nuanced work. And it's just the reality of it. And you got to understand that, you're talking about adjusting what we just talked about there with clip gain is adjusting the volume of a particular word so it matches the rest of it, and adjusting the EQ of that word just in that spot so that it evens out the performance. And if you imagine a whole 3.5 minute vocal performance, you might be doing that a lot, especially if you're not getting a well-recorded vocal from but even great vocalists, like someone like Khalid, who's amazing. It's not something he did wrong. You're just like, that was the take and it's great, but I need a little more volume. I need a little more mid-range so it hits the saturation just the right way for this one word, because that's going to make this whole thing subtly better.
It took me 2 days to clip gain and kind of understand what Kesha's vocal was going to feel like on Praying. Ryan Lewis, it took him a day or two after he comped it, and then I did another comp and then another clip gain. Like, that was 4 days of vocals.
And she's a great singer. She's
a great singer.
This is not a knock on her. This is what it takes sometimes.
Yes. So I want to use that to add another layer. It's not because we're trying to only balance out. We're trying to get a feel. We're trying to get a vocal feel when someone's that good of a singer, right? So if you take a limiter and you clamp down the entirety of the vocal, that's dictating the feel instead of letting the singer dictate the feel, right? So when I say, or when we both say balanced and dynamic, the dynamics are what determine the groove and the feel of the performance. And we also need to keep it up front because it's a pop record and we need you to hear the lyrics and it needs to drive the record. Like, there's all these purposes, but I think that this is an opinion. I'm not quite sure that anybody else feels this way based on how I hear vocals over compressed all the time. I think the listener will lean in to listen when they love the song with a vocal that is a tiny bit more dynamic than a lot of mixers are leaving their vocals. Okay. I really have faith in humanity and ears and passionate humans that really care about music, that they're going to be okay with something that comes and goes a little bit, just a little bit.
Well, people have to remember too that, and even in the way we're talking, things are dynamic, things are up, things are down, things are forward, things are softer. What you're doing is you're translating human communication. I mean, this is getting very philosophical about it, but a vocal isn't meant to be something that just sticks right. It's like a vocal.
So annoying.
A vocal is something that is a dynamic communication. And if you think about the way people speak, with spaces, with dynamics, with emphasis, you're trying to enhance that process. Now, certainly against a wall of music, you're going to need to squish the dynamics sometimes, but not to the point where you're just putting a limiter on it and then it stays in one place. A vocal should feel like a performance.
Yeah, and also I'm learning that people from me do want a bit more of a compressed sound sometimes. And when they do, I'm just trying to learn and practice other ways to do it than just clamp down on it with a plugin. And I'm figuring it out. I'm still practicing. I'm still learning. The project you talked about that you're working on, I'm also working on different songs, and we finally got it across the line.
Right.
And with everybody happy, and it's 5-6 dB quieter overall. The vocal is so loud, and last night I got asked, go a touch further on the last chorus. It's like, it's too far. And then now the last note that I have to do after this is, hey, can you ease up on the de-esser now? It's like, yeah, it's just too loud. I wouldn't have to do that. It's I don't know what people are listening on. So that's another point. But when I put it in my car, my AirPods and my PMCs up here, it's just too loud. So I don't know what people are listening on, but it's hurting. I can't even turn the record up to everything else that I listen to. So
I have lots of thoughts on it because I'm working on the same project as you. So I understand, but it's a challenge. Yeah. Part of it is people getting attached to early versions of things. We've talked about this before with limiters and dynamics and things on rough mixes. Like people get attached to things. The first version or two you do, no matter what it is, people will get attached to it if they love the song. And a lot of our job is kind of trying to translate that and pull apart some of the intense dynamics. And it's a challenge. I wanted to
let's touch base on this. Let's touch on this comment that Caleb just put in. I need to, thank you for this. I need to clip gain more and stop being lazy with compressors. I don't think that the job of an engineer has any place overall for laziness. Engineers work hard. They trial and error. They're not show up and they're not the last to show up and the first to leave. It's always the opposite. So I think that language just needs to go away from every aspect of this. We do what needs to be done until the song is complete. Our job is to complete the song or start the song, depending. Yeah. And to be lazy with a compressor, I'm glad it was listed as that in the comment, because it makes no sense. Like, why would something do everything? It just, and I think that tools were limited in certain decades. So you had to rely on, you had one console EQ sometimes, and you had to, with 3 or 5 bands, and that was it. Now we can have 30 bands of EQ, getting rid of these weird harmonics that shouldn't be in the sound. That's how we get things to be so modern and loud these days, is you can do a lot of surgical reductive EQs so you can get things to be louder without these harsh things hurting you. It's like what made the sound of pop, this more clean approach and the right amount of filth and that balance, because we have more tools and we have endless possibilities of cleanliness and choosing that balance. And so it's the opposite of lazy. Things take time. Sometimes, like I've said this before, sometimes I do mix a song in 45 minutes. It only happens when it's recorded so well. When that happens, it's delivered so well, and I get to just take it over the edge, that extra 5%. That's rare. So when I say it happens, yes, of course it happens. It's just so rare. Most of the time it's tedious moves, and I have an assistant that I pay to do it so I can go in and do the creative moves. But someone's got to do it. So if you don't have an assistant to do it, you have to do it. And it has to be done. There is no lazy version of this. And like you said earlier, this is long cuts. There are no shortcuts for this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's also, as a little caveat, of course, there are times when you need to move quickly, especially if you're in the studio with someone, you're recording something, you want flow to be good. But by and large, we're talking about mixing, right? So you want to be able to use all the tools at your disposal. And we're getting to a place where everybody's got the same tools. So everybody has RVox, everybody has CLA vocals, and those are fine for some people in some situations. But if you're an engineer, why would you not spend all the time? And not to talk about
what we're supposed to spend our time on.
Not that we need to talk about this as a competitive thing, but like, isn't that what your expertise is? It's not hard to just spend the time. It's hard to get the years of experience, but that takes time. But it takes time. It takes years, but you have to put in the time to do it. The reason that Jon and I can have these conversations is because we're insane people who have spent hours and hours and hours and hours for years and years and years trying a lot of this stuff and still trying it. And still, Jon just told me a new option 6 on Pro Tools. I'm going to start doing that. I didn't know that was a thing. Where I can do EQ on a particular clip. Like these sorts of things, I'm always looking for new things. And yes, when you're in the studio, you want to be able to move quickly. But like we talked about last week a little bit, if your default is to just throw RVox on there or CLA vocals, there may be a way, and I would encourage, I just don't want to shit on people who make plugins, but like make your own chain. Make your own chain with an EQ and a compressor and a saturator.
That's what I said last week. Import it.
As I was saying, just import it. Every program can do that. You have your vocal chain that's your own version, that's a better, more customizable, more tweakable, more adaptable for a particular vocalist that has a few different plugins that make up that same sound you're after, and just use that as your vocal template. There's no reason to use these preset things if you don't have to. And if you're, those of you that are watching that are engineers, producers, whatever, you can do it.
Those multi-functional plugins were designed by people that made these chains.
Yes.
So you can use their fake version of their chain. So make your own chain that makes people happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you got to use Chris Lord-Alge's chain? Let
plugin
Chris
chain.
use his chain. That's what I mean. It's not even
preset
like,
plugin. Yeah.
Like watching Tony mix and just having a jolly good time, being like, "Hey, let's throw the Maserati piano plugin on this snare drum." He never put the plugin that it's called on the thing that it was for, right? Like the chains are cool. Like actually that harmonics one for piano is super cool plugin. I don't have it, but we used it and it's got this cool detuning delay on it. Like put that on a guitar. I bet that sounds sick. Maserati vocal plugin on vocals. That's not what Tony's vocal sounds like. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like I know what Tony's vocal sounds like.
Shout out, Tony.
Mad shout out to one of the best.
One of the goats.
You just make your own chains. It's fun. We're going to be, if we're going to be an engineer and not a producer, and you're going to, if you're going to do what I've done too, which is decide I'm a mix engineer and soon to be recording engineer again as well. I'm not a producer. Well, what is my creative, input to this process? It's going to be chains. It's going to be the way I make things feel after the fact or in the beginning. Like, why can't we take claim and a bit more control over that part of the process?
And do that if you're a producer too. Everybody should be doing this. There's no reason. Yeah. There's no if you have a plugin that you use that's an all-in-one. Make your own version of it. Experiment with it. And all of a sudden, then you've got your sound and your thing, and you know more about it, and you've become better at your job. Like, there's it's just putting in the time. You just, no shortcuts, long cuts.
Yeah. Long cuts.
What do we got? See. We had a transitional moment earlier, but maybe I want to go back to it. Feel. Somebody asked in the chat, how do you know what a vocal is supposed to feel like, or what does it feel like, or how do you know what feel? And there was a great question. Hubertus, forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. I tried transient shaping with neutron, but then the vocal lost its pocket. That's a real thing. When you compress, when you do transients, a vocal performance changes, and that's a really important thing. And that's part of what we talk about with compression generally, is that compression changes the feel of a vocal. A dynamic feel is a big part of what makes a performance, like we're talking about speaking voice, whatever. You have to understand that all of these things are going to change how a vocal feels against the track. And there's no answer for what is a vocal? How do you know what a vocal feel? Like feel is one of those general words that means it sounds right. And by the way, you can have a feel of a vocal and then all of a sudden you compress it and saturate it and turn up transients and then it feels different, but still great.
So that's the thing.
Feel is an arbitrary thing but it's important to understand the way a vocal sits against a musical track, especially rhythmically, is what we mean by feel. But that good feel, bad feel is very much a subjective thing, but intention is really important. So sorry, go ahead, please.
No, that's good. Those are all great. You got to check the rough mix. You got to check the demo if you're producing. Did you change it for the better? I like to think about enhancing, right? So yeah, it's changed, but I want to enhance it. If I'm going too far, and it's on my end, then I got to backtrack. But if I'm at the right place, and it's bringing out the actual pocket, which is wrong, then they're going to realize that. And part of the mix process is sometimes revealing problems in the recording, the performance, the production. I mean, I'm on round 3 of a vocal getting recut because every time I make the vocal sound good, the artist is like, damn, I need to recut that. Like now that and it's always like, now that the vocal sounds this good, we blah, 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 right? Like it's not 100%. You made it wrong. Like, oh, you made me realize that my pocket, this is happening right now. Great singer. Like she's amazing. And like, just, I don't know. I thought she nailed it on the first pass. To be honest, I thought I revealed the rawness and how the vocal was supposed to feel, but I think she got a little in her head about it, and now she's cutting it on the second time of recutting it. So the point of the mixer is to reveal, right? So we're revealing
and enhance, like you said.
Yeah. But when I say reveal, I mean revealing the best parts of performances, the soul, the emotion, the vulnerability, the angst, whatever emotion you're going for. My job is to reveal that and enhance that and embolden that. So sometimes it's going to go backwards. So yeah, there's no real answer about that feel question, except for if you're doing too much. I mean, the transient shapers can be really heavy handed. Like when I'm doing it on a vocal on neutron, I'll just be real with everybody. I'm never more than 2 on the attack. Like maybe usually 1. It's like a little poke. I think I'm trying to get that rhythm and that drive from saturation and EQ and excitement, because it should be in the performance. If you have to enhance it that much, it's not your fault. It's not on your end. I wouldn't go too far on those things. What?
I would say it's absolutely true. When you start doing things like transients, you're making something almost by definition more percussive. And so that will, whether it actually changes the feel by, it's obviously not changing timing, but if it's emphasizing a certain part of the vocal, all of a sudden that dominates, can change the groove. It's very true that a lot of these things any vocal processing of any kind is going to change how a song feels. And presumably, like you said, if you are, and there's no good answer because it really is just experience. When you listen to something and you go, this is how it's feeling. Now I have the vocal track. Now I have the stems. I have the individual pieces. Okay, I see what they're doing. I can enhance this a little bit. This vocal is leading the groove here. I'm going to make it poke out a little bit more. I'm going to automate this up more, or I'm going to pull this back because it's kind of ruining the drum, whatever it is. Like those are things.
Solo, the vocal, and one main harmonic piece, whether it's a piano, a guitar, a synth, and just hear the song. If you're, do that all the time. I love doing that.
So soloing in groups.
Yeah, soloing groups. But if you're having trouble with the feel of the record, hear the record with less percussive elements. That'll probably tell you something.
I think also the corollary to that is true as well, which is listen to the vocal and just the drums and see how the song grooves. There's all those things are revealing, especially if something is not working and you're not sure why. Soloing in small sections is a huge revealer of the nuts and bolts of a song. Yeah.
So that's a good way to close on that question. Let's move on.
We've got another 15 minutes or so. Let's see.
Yeah, we're good.
We'll do a couple of, there's one that's fun. I want to save that for the end.
Okay. This isn't all fun?
This is all fun, but there's one that's just like a pure, kind of shit talking, but fun. Miggy asked, this is sort of a technical thing, and I think the answer is it depends. But when you receive mono vocal stems as stereo tracks, do you split them mono, process them as they are?
No, I split them to mono, and you gotta turn them up. You gotta clip gain them up by the pan depth.
Yep, by the pan depth.
I always have my pan depth.
Which is what, -6? What is it usually?
No.
-3?
So I think Pro Tools defaults to -3. I do -2.5.
Okay.
I think an SSL was like -6.
Okay, and that's just when you move things to the side, it actually reduces them in volume slightly.
Yes. Yeah. So when a stereo track is split to mono, you have to clip gain it up, the equivalent to the pan depth.
Because you're only taking half the audio file, you need to bring it up.
Yep.
Yeah, I've definitely left things in stereo. If the other thing too is to be careful of, and you've got an assistant and good ears and experience, but when you take a stereo track that appears to be mono, it may have a stereo moment or two in it. Be real careful about that shit.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
Or a subtle like stereo slap. I don't know. There's a
you
there's
can
a few
see that
times
visually though. The meter will not be perfectly stereo if there's any sort of stereo processing on it.
Yeah.
So don't go based on look, everybody. It's look at the meter and listen.
Yeah. But that's an important thing. But yeah, I'll usually switch things to mono just for ease of, and then we can pan stuff and do whatever. Let's just do a fun one. We got another 10 or so minutes. Favorite / most. This is from Ty. Favorite / most exciting / most impressive contemporary vocalists. Who do you like? Okay, well I'll start then. My 100%, and shout out Baines because I know he watches these. Young Thug is my favorite vocalist by far in all of contemporary music. I think his range and his tone, and I think in a different life he's like a crooner in the 40s. Like he's his voice does things that just blow my fucking mind. And shout out Baines for recording his vocal. Thug is probably my favorite contemporary vocalist. I don't know who
You're breaking. I can't hear a word. You're a robot. You've been for a while, but it's got really bad.
Oh, really? You're clear for me.
I know your Wi-Fi does this.
My Wi-Fi does this. I don't know. You look clear to me. Is in the chat? Can you see us? Can you hear us? Is everything clear?
Yeah,
Do I
basically,
sound like a robot?
barely.
I'm gonna see what the chat says. Shout out Alex Toomey too. I don't know Alex, but
Alex isn't recording Thug anymore. But he works on the mixes as well. Love Alex Toomey. So shout out to Alex. I would say Rosalia.
Yeah.
I love Thug, so I'll second your Thug. And I'll.
Oh, I am all messed up. That's a bummer.
Yeah, you're all messed up. I would add Rosalia because she does all the things that I want out of a vocalist.
Oh no, I'm all pixelated.
It's hard to talk right now because it's distracting.
Let's see, can you hear me now at all?
Yeah, it's still pretty bad, but.
All right, well, I wanted to get on a fun riff on Vocalist, but maybe we can go more on it next week. It's a little better? No, I don't know.
Yeah, a little better.
A little better.
Yeah, I love Rosalia. She's vulnerable. She's exciting. She's energetic. She's subtle. She's dynamic. She's clean. She's trashy. She's all the right balance of all of the things.
You know who I think is underrated as a vocalist is Post Malone. I feel like
he's so good.
I feel like people just kind of go, "Oh, he's Post Malone. He does his thing." But when you listen to a record like Sunflower, and I love Sway Lee. I think Sway Lee's got a super buttery voice. When Post comes in, it's like this saturated, Bud Light and cigarettes. Like it sounds huge. It sounds dynamic. It sounds incredible. I think his voice is super, super underrated. I think he's really, really special.
Yeah. Love Post Malone. I'm biased because I mix her vocals, but I love Mariba.
I don't know Mariba.
Mariba is fantastic. She's from Atlanta. Well, she's from Ethiopia. But she's Atlanta, kind of in the crew with Black and that camp. Love Renaissance Camp. She's from another time. Check out Mariba. Check out Sandstorm with JID. It's a good duet we did.
Yeah, Sunflower, so damn clamped. It is clamped, and that's I think why I like that vocal so much, because it somehow sounds like exciting and amazing when it comes in. It's a testament to Post's.
That's him. I think we could do better.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Ty. I love that Sandstorm record. I think Post could sound better. I mean, if we're trying to talk about how we feel about these things, like, I think that he's great, and I think that he could be more dynamic and it would hit harder. Yeah. Vocally. I think the beats too, the records too, like that Circles mix can be so much better. People are so into the way that sounds. It just sounds like it was recorded in the 70s. Why not reference the 70s and make it hit like a record now? It just doesn't make any sense to me to be of that time completely. Just doesn't make any sense. So I feel that way about that. Who else?
Yeah, I want to see if I can grab any. People are. Eiler's asking about tuning. We haven't really talked about that. Do you do much tuning yourself? Are you using?
Nope.
Do you ever tune?
I just say, can you all send me a tuned vocal, please, if you want?
Yeah.
I'll do subtle auto tune if something's like really just a little bit, but no.
And you'll just grab a little. Graphical mode from auto tune. And just tweak
I don't think Lewis Bell will come at me. I think Lewis Bell's fucking great.
Lewis is amazing.
I don't, let the process continue. But maybe he'll hear something and think about it. I don't know. I think he's fucking fantastic. There's nothing wrong with what's happening. I just think that a little bit of dynamics in the upper mid range could enhance the performance some more bottom end than the overall mix. That's all.
It feels like we're going to get, and maybe we'll be some part of that, but it feels like we're going to get a shift. We're already starting to get that. I mean, there was like a decade of it felt like just computer records, and now people are really interested in how to figure out interested in figuring out how to get more dynamic records to happen. And I think people don't realize how much space there is with the loudness algorithms in Spotify, and Apple and Tidal, that there's a lot of opportunity to do more dynamic things that aren't so just like feels like it's a computer in a bedroom in your face, which has some excitement to it, but I feel like there's more stuff to be done there.
Just quickly, yes, Jumbo Sounds. Manny did mix that, but Lewis Bell did vocal production and finished the record and records and does all of that. So you'd think that some of that, as a mixer, I would know that a lot of that translates into where I would take it or how Manny would take it, and it dictates the sound a lot. So, it's a combination.
How much do you, that's an interesting topic too. How much do you attribute a lot of these records that are being mixed by a lot of the same people to the sound of the mixer versus the sound of the producers that are doing the rough mixes?
Depends.
Speak on that a little bit.
I don't know if I should. But I don't want to speak for anybody else,
Yeah.
I mean, I try to put in, my aesthetic on everything just because it's the only way I hear music is the way my ears hear it. But I rely on the rough mix for vibe. I want to maintain the vibe, as I'm sure that most people feel that way. And sometimes you need to go heavy-handed and change the vibe because it's just all wrong, or you can tell the intention that someone was going for and you go further. Sometimes they'll like it, sometimes they won't. First pass is how I view mixing in general. But I don't know. When I hear some mixes, I'm like, nah, that was a bad rough mix. You could tell. It's like when a mastering engineer can tell that it's a bad master versus a bad mix. We can kind of just tell that the rough mix dictated how the final record sounded.